You're not tired. Not exactly. What you are, is unfinished. You close your laptop, turn off the light, adjust the pillow. But something inside stays upright, awake. Not because your body isn't ready, it is, but because something in your mind is still pacing, still checking, still waiting. You came here for sleep. Or for the science of it. Maybe to fix a rhythm, or understand why yours broke. And somewhere along the way, you heard the word, dopamine. A word dressed in clickbait and cold diagrams. The pleasure chemical. The reason we can't stop. But that's not what dopamine is. Not really. It's not the pleasure. It's the promise of it. A thin, invisible tether pulling your thoughts forward, one frame at a time. And when you look closely, you start to notice, it never lets go. Dopamine is the quiet ache behind ambition. It doesn't say, this is enough. It says, maybe the next thing will be. We built entire cities on that whisper. Careers. Revolutions. Even this moment, you, staring into a screen hoping to feel settled, was engineered by it. It's not evil. It's not even wrong. It's just hungry. Biologists will tell you dopamine is a neurotransmitter. A messenger molecule that travels between neurons. They'll say it spikes during sex, success, novelty. They'll show you graphs, brain scans, pathways with names that sound too precise to be as mysterious as they are. They'll say dopamine is what gets you high. But that's only a shadow of the truth. Because dopamine doesn't signal having. It signals seeking. And seeking never ends. Imagine a rat in a lab. It presses a lever. Food comes out. At first, its brain lights up when it eats. But after a few days, the lighting changes. The real spark, the dopamine, shows up not when the reward is received, but just before. When the lever is pressed. When the outcome is unknown. That's the truth we miss. Dopamine isn't satisfaction. It's anticipation. It's the flicker of maybe. The thrill of almost. The chemical signature of hope. But hope, when fed without end, becomes noise. A static hum that never quiets. That's why you scroll long past the point of meaning. Why you keep checking the same 3 apps even though they never change. Why your inbox stays open, refreshed, empty. Why your mind rehearses the same worries, the same to-do lists, again and again, as if repetition itself might create resolution. Dopamine isn't looking for answers. It's looking for open loops, and it can't sleep until they close. And now you're starting to see it. Sleep isn't blocked by wakefulness. It's blocked by wanting. As long as the system thinks there's something left to gain, it stays alert. Not in fear. Not in fight. Just, ready. And readiness is the opposite of rest. You've probably tried the usual fixes. Magnesium, no screens after 9. Weighted blankets, meditation apps with ocean sounds. But still you lie there. Still your thoughts reach out. Still the current runs. Because none of those things touch the root. None of them tell your dopamine system, you are safe to stop. We weren't designed for a world of infinite reward pathways. You weren't supposed to be able to trigger novelty with a flick of your thumb. Every new scroll, every flashing notification, every cliffhanger and quick cut and red dot icon. They all feed the same machinery. They all scream maybe. And your brain listens. But maybe it didn't start here. Maybe it started the first time you achieved something, and were told you could do more. Maybe it was the first gold star. The first pat on the head. The first praise that said, yes, but next time, better. Maybe dopamine isn't just chemistry. Maybe it's memory. The learned rhythm of never quite there. So now, when the night falls quiet and you should be falling too, your mind panics. It doesn't know how to not reach. Stillness feels like failure. Rest feels like missing something. And sleep feels like surrender. But dopamine does not surrender. It paces. It plots. It keeps the lights on in rooms you didn't even know you were in. And maybe, deep down, you're afraid that if you stop chasing, you'll stop existing. You've been told sleep is about melatonin, about circadian rhythms and body temperature. But those are just locks. Dopamine is the key. Because you can't drift if you're still striving. You can't rest if your brain is still reaching. And most of us have forgotten how to stop. You're not broken. But the world you live in was built without breaks. Every app, every ad, every second of your digital life, it all runs on the currency of incomplete satisfaction. That is dopamine's empire. And the deeper truth is this. You've mistaken its voice for your own. You've called its hunger your ambition. You've called its ache your identity. But it is not you. It's just the fire that keeps burning, even after the meal is gone. There's a silence after the hunt that the system was never built for. And that's where sleep begins. Not when you're out of energy, but when you're out of longing. And if you've forgotten what that feels like, you're not alone. Most of us are still chasing shadows through the night, hoping they'll turn into doors. But not everything worth feeling needs to be earned. Some things are waiting for you to stop looking. And that might be the only way home. There's a strange kind of silence that falls in the moments just before sleep, if you've ever made it that far. Not the peaceful kind. Not the quiet surrender you're promised in wellness commercials. No. This silence feels conditional. Like the world has stopped making noise, but it hasn't stopped watching. You feel it behind your eyes. In the way your mind circles back to thoughts you thought were finished. In the way your body twitches as it lets go of tension you didn't know you'd been holding. You might think that's rest. But that twitch isn't peace. It's withdrawal. Because dopamine doesn't leave gently. It fights for control the way a flame fights for oxygen. It doesn't rage, it lingers. And as the rest of your system begins to downshift, dopamine becomes the last light to go out. That light is the reason sleep doesn't come when you want it to. It comes when the mind finally stops arguing with the night. Let's say you did everything right. You avoided blue light. You journaled. You took your L-theanine and put on white noise. And still, your eyes closed, your limbs warm, your breath slow. Your thoughts began to sprint. One more idea. One more memory. One more correction to a conversation that happened 12 years ago. Why? Because dopamine isn't connected to urgency. It's connected to possibility. It doesn't care when you act, it only cares that you might. That some version of you, even a hypothetical one, could still reach forward and change something. And sleep, real sleep, is a space where nothing more can be done. That's what makes it healing. That's also what makes it threatening. They don't tell you this in neuroscience textbooks, but the dopamine system isn't just biological. It's narrative. It's built on story fragments that never got their endings. Why does your brain keep replaying the argument? Why does it conjure possible replies, insults, comebacks, apologies, even years later? Because in the logic of dopamine, the story isn't closed. There's still a chance, however impossible, that action can be taken. And as long as that chance exists, dopamine keeps the file open. That's the second hunger. Not for reward. But for resolution. It's why the final minutes before sleep often feel like digging through a box of things you forgot you'd lost. Old embarrassments. What-ifs. Unanswered texts. Half-built futures. It's not your memory doing that. It's your dopaminergic prediction circuitry, the part of your brain that calculates outcomes, reruns simulations, and prepares for opportunity. And here's the trap. That circuit doesn't turn off automatically. It doesn't respond to fatigue the way muscles do. You can run until your legs give out. You can speak until your voice cracks. But your dopamine system can keep simulating outcomes, forever. Because it feeds on the unknown. And the unknown, in a world like this, never ends. They ran a study, maybe you've heard of it. A group of volunteers was placed in a room with a single red button. They were told, if you press the button, there's a 50-50 chance it will release a puff of pleasant scent, or nothing. No reward. No punishment. Just the possibility of a mild, pleasant smell. Most people kept pressing the button over and over again for hours. Not because the reward was powerful, but because the maybe was. That's dopamine's core logic. Certainty is boring, but maybe is addictive. Now take that same principle, and apply it to your life. Maybe that message you sent will still get a reply. Maybe you forgot something important today. Maybe the solution will come if you just think a little longer. Maybe you're not finished yet. So you lie there, body still, brain spinning. Not because you're flawed, but because you're still connected to the loop. The search hasn't ended. So neither can the sleep. Here's the irony. The more we know about dopamine, the better we become at feeding it, and the worse we get at living alongside it. In the past, rewards were rare. Uncertainty had natural limits. You could only chase what you could physically reach. You could only imagine what the horizon allowed. But now, every second offers another simulation. Every notification, another hit of what comes next. Your brain, designed to manage a trickle of novelty, is now submerged in a flood of unending partial resolutions, half-complete stories, unfinished posts, videos that end on cliffhangers, content loops that never resolve, because resolution kills retention. They don't want you to finish. They want you to keep seeking. And dopamine obeys. Let's talk about the darker side. The part most people never admit. Even when you do get the thing, the message, the like, the laugh, the win, it doesn't end anything. It just shifts the goalpost. The satisfaction is microscopic. The longing returns. And it doesn't wait. This is why rich people still chase more. Why beautiful people still feel unloved. Why high achievers still can't sleep. Because dopamine doesn't say, good job. It says, what's next? And if you build your identity around that question, stillness becomes a kind of death. Sleep is where the chase stops. Where the narrative pauses. Where the unknown is accepted, not resolved. And that, to a dopamine-bound brain, feels wrong. It feels like defeat. You're not staying awake because you want to. You're staying awake because something inside you believes it hasn't earned rest. But that belief, it's not coming from you. It's coming from a system built to never stop asking. That's the lie buried at the core of our productivity obsession. That rest is a reward. That sleep must be purchased through effort. That you have to deserve peace. Dopamine reinforces that myth. Because it was never built for peace. It was built for motion. Even if the only direction is forward into nothing. Here's the quiet truth, if you can sit with it. You will never finish everything. You will never be entirely understood. You will never close every loop. And that's not a flaw in your life. It's a feature of being human. Sleep doesn't wait for closure. It waits for surrender. It waits for the moment you stop negotiating with the hunger inside. Not to silence it. Not to cure it. Just to let it be, without obeying it. That's when the silence comes, not as an absence of sound, but as the absence of reaching. And when that reaching finally lets go, sleep steps in, like a tide over footprints, not to erase you, but to remind you. There is a world beneath the chase. And it has been waiting all along. Close your eyes. Not to sleep, not yet, but just to listen. There's a space between thoughts, if you're quiet enough. Not silence exactly. More like a background hum. Most people never hear it. Not because it's subtle, but because it's buried. Under noise. Under urgency. Under want. It's the sound of a system left running. Even after you've logged out. You'd think rest is just the absence of movement. But it's not. Stillness has to be chosen. And dopamine doesn't let you choose. Even in deep fatigue, even when your body aches and your head pulses, there's still something inside that won't quiet. You can feel it, can't you? That unfinished world in your mind, a dozen open windows, waiting. What if you missed something? What if that person finally replied? What if you forgot to lock the door? What if that thing you said earlier meant more than you realized? These aren't thoughts. They're hooks. And every one of them is baited with dopamine. It's easy to believe the mind is just reacting to what's around it, that the brain only stirs when something happens. But that's not how it works. The brain creates its own triggers. It loops its own bait. And the dopamine system? It was designed not just to respond to opportunity, but to invent it. See, the brain doesn't like stasis. It treats neutrality as a problem to be solved. So even in the absence of external stimulus, it generates possibilities, scenarios, fantasies, dangers, desires. They play out behind your eyelids like dream fragments on shuffle, some of them absurd, some disturbingly sharp. And the more you try not to engage with them, the more they pull. You might think that's anxiety, or overthinking, or trauma. But underneath those labels, what's really happening is this. The dopamine network is still scanning for unfinished reward. This is what psychologists call the Zeigarnik effect, the mind's compulsion to fixate on incomplete tasks. It was discovered by a woman watching waiters in a Berlin cafe. She noticed they remembered open orders in great detail, but once the bill was paid, the memory vanished. The brain holds on to the unresolved, not because it wants to, because it has to. The dopamine system doesn't like loose ends. And sleep, real sleep, requires exactly that. The willingness to leave things unresolved. But how do you do that in a world that rewards the opposite? A world where even your dreams are optimized. Where rest is framed as recovery, just another way to improve your output. Where self-care is a checklist. Where mindfulness is packaged like software updates, bite-sized, scheduled, monetized. Dopamine thrives in that kind of environment. It adapts. It finds new levers to press. Even your attempts to escape it become new forms of chasing. You read books on sleep hygiene. You track your REM cycles. You experiment with biohacks. You fast. You breathe. You abstain. You count backwards from 100. All in an effort to reach a state that cannot be reached, only fallen into. And the more you try to force it, the further it gets. There's a cruelty in that loop. Not malicious. Just mechanical. The system isn't broken. It's over-optimized. Evolution didn't account for algorithms. It didn't imagine your brain would one day be hijacked by infinite novelty machines. To dopamine, it doesn't matter whether the opportunity is real. Only that it's possible. So it reacts the same way to a job interview or a text bubble. To a tiger or a Tinder match. To hunger or the memory of hunger. It doesn't discriminate between reality and rehearsal. And the world has learned how to exploit that blindness. Think about this. Every major tech platform is built around one idea: variable reward. It's not enough to give users what they want. You have to make them wonder if they'll get it. That's where the power is. That's where dopamine lives. And that's why you find yourself, hours later, still scrolling, still swiping, still circling a digital drain. You're not looking for something. You're hoping something finds you. Because hope, when stretched thin enough, becomes addiction. And addiction doesn't always look like needles or powder. Sometimes it looks like routine. Like habits so normalized, you forget their compulsions. Like checking your phone the moment you wake up. Not for anything specific. Just for the possibility. Here's where it turns darker, quieter. There's a line most people never notice they've crossed. When dopamine stops pushing you toward life. And starts pulling you away from presence. You stop experiencing moments. You start simulating better ones. You lose the ability to sit still without narrative. You lose the joy of enough. You crave not what is, but what could be, if only. And sleep is the final betrayal of that craving. Because in sleep, you give up authorship. You give up control. You surrender the script. That terrifies a system designed to generate futures. Dopamine is allergic to oblivion. But you need a little oblivion to heal. This is why you feel a certain vertigo when you finally start drifting. Not just fatigue, a kind of psychological disorientation. As if your inner narrator has lost the thread. Because for the first time all day, you are not reaching. You are not becoming. You are just dissolving. And the ego, that lovely, fragile architecture built on desire and forward motion, doesn't like to dissolve. It tells you to get up. To check. To try again. Not because you're in danger. But because you've entered a space where dopamine has no role. And to the system that's kept you alert for your entire waking life. That feels like death. But it's not. It's the opposite. It's repair. It's reset. It's the sound of every unresolved loop finally accepting the fact that not everything must be finished. Not every question must be answered. Not every story must end with clarity. There is mercy in the incomplete. But only if you stop trying to edit it. Only if you let go of the hunger to know, to win, to fix. And that is the real cost of sleep in this world. Not time. Not effort. But permission. Permission to feel unimportant. To go unseen. To fall, gently, into a night that does not need you to be ready. Sleep waits for the moment you stop narrating your life. Not because the story is over. But because, for a few hours, it doesn't need to be told. And maybe that's the only peace left to us. Not the peace of resolution. But the peace of release. Not the peace of answers. But of no longer needing them. Dopamine will still be there in the morning. It always is. But tonight. Let it pace the halls alone. You wake up in the middle of the night. No sound. No alarm. No real reason. But something in you is already awake. Not just conscious, alert. It's subtle at first. A faint urge to check something. The time, maybe. Or your messages. Or a headline you barely care about. You tell yourself you won't get up. You'll roll over. Breathe. Let it pass. But the thought has already taken root. And dopamine, patient, invisible, begins its whisper campaign. It doesn't shout. It just makes everything else feel slightly less satisfying than the thing you haven't done yet. The message you haven't seen. The closure you haven't found. It turns presence into punishment. And craving into comfort. Let's strip the illusion. The thought that pulls you out of bed at 3:17 a.m. isn't yours. Not really. It's a phantom impulse sent by a system that confuses attention with survival. You're not curious. You're primed. Primed to reach. Primed to seek. Primed to complete. Because your brain is still running the loop. Still spinning the same prediction engine that powered your daytime hunger. The same engine that made you check your phone 15 times without meaning to. The same engine that turned every quiet moment into a waiting room for something else. Dopamine's favorite game is almost. And at night, when the world stops giving you real inputs, it feeds on imagined ones. Memories, what-ifs. Ghost notifications. You think it's you. But it isn't. It's just the hunger, wearing your voice. There's a moment in every night where you either slip into unconsciousness. Or slip into narrative. And narrative is what keeps you awake. We're taught to think of stories as entertainment. But biologically, stories are simulations. Your brain builds them to prepare, to rehearse, to predict. And dopamine rewards that process, not with peace, but with potential. So when you lie in bed and your mind starts running scenarios, what they said, what you'll say, what you should have said, you're not overthinking. You're rewarding your brain for inventing threats. And every time it generates a new one, dopamine marks it as important. Not because it is, but because it might be. And might be is enough to keep the machine running. Think about how strange this is. Your body is still. The room is quiet. There is no actual danger. No opportunity. No task to complete. And still, your mind will not stop moving. It's not fear. It's continuity. Because dopamine doesn't operate on the rhythm of night and day. It doesn't care if you're tired. It doesn't care if it's 2 a.m. or 2 p.m. If there's a chance that one more action could lead to reward. It fires, and fires, and fires again. The neurochemical equivalent of tapping someone's shoulder every 10 seconds just to say, hey, what if we're missing something? And if you listen to it long enough, you forget what silence ever felt like. This is why insomnia doesn't always feel like panic. Sometimes, it feels like thinking too clearly. You don't feel chaotic. You feel organized, almost productive. Like maybe, just maybe, you could solve something important at 3 a.m. Like maybe you should. But it's a trick. A mirage. The clarity you feel isn't insight. It's dopamine sharpening your mind in the hope of finding a lever to pull. And the longer you follow it, the more certain you become that peace is just one solved thought away. Just one. Always just one. Here's a truth no one likes to admit. Sometimes we prefer the chase to the rest. Not because it feels better, but because it feels more like us. We've spent so many years equating movement with identity. That stillness feels like losing ourselves. And dopamine, always listening, adapts to that belief. It learns what to highlight, what to withhold, what to decorate in urgency. So you don't just crave resolution. You start to crave the feeling of needing it. Even suffering, if it's paired with purpose, becomes addictive. You're not just avoiding sleep. You're protecting the illusion that you're still becoming. Because sleep means, the day is done. And what if the day wasn't enough? So what do we do? If the machine runs even when we want it to stop. If the hunger wears our voice. If dopamine turns our own narrative against us. How do we rest? Not by fighting it. And not by feeding it. But by watching it, without moving. Like standing on the shore as the tide reaches for you, again and again. You don't have to wade in. You don't have to run. You just have to see it. And not act. Not this time. Because every time you don't follow the impulse, every time you don't check, swipe, answer, fix, solve, you teach your system something it forgot. Not every flicker of possibility deserves pursuit. Some can be allowed to fade. Sleep is not earned by resolving the loop. It's earned by refusing to keep it alive. The loop will beg. It will reason. It will flash images and phrases, half-finished sentences and unresolved chords, anything to get one more turn of your attention. It doesn't even want resolution. It just wants movement, engagement, fuel. But you're allowed to stop mid-sentence. You're allowed to leave things unsaid, unsent, unsolved. That's not laziness. That's mercy. Because the hunger isn't you. It only sounds like you. And your rest does not need its permission. You may lie awake for a while. You may hear the loop spinning. You may feel the urge rise and fall, over and over. That's not failure. That's the withdrawal of attention from a system that never learned how to end. Dopamine doesn't punish you. It just waits. But tonight, you can let it wait. You don't have to give it another story. Another problem. Another lever. Let it pace. Let it plan. Let it twitch in the dark. And you? You are not the hunger. You are the one watching it go quiet. And eventually, even the machine runs out of questions. Even the hunger forgets to ask. Even the voice, so certain it was you, fades into the hum it came from. And what's left behind is sleep. There's a difference between being tired and being ready to sleep. You know this by now. You felt the ache in your limbs, the heaviness behind your eyes, and still, no rest. Because rest isn't granted by the body. It's granted by the mind's permission to stop. But what if that permission has been sold off? Not in a transaction you can remember. But piece by piece, moment by moment, across a lifetime of rewards never quite fully earned. Dopamine isn't just a molecule. It's a currency system. And the debt it runs on isn't financial. It's unfinished time. You might think of dopamine as a response, a payout when something good happens. But that's not how the system works. It doesn't just reward. It incentivizes. And what it incentivizes most, is incompletion. The cliffhanger. The unsent message. The open loop. The promise that something better is coming if you check. If you wait. If you try again. The brain's dopamine economy thrives on the idea that satisfaction lies just past this current frame. Not now. But soon. And soon is the most profitable lie in the human nervous system. That lie is everywhere. In shows that autoplay their next episode before you've exhaled. In apps that never say, "You're done here." In feeds that scroll forever. A book ends. A painting stops. A song has silence after the last note. But the digital world, the world dopamine loves, is allergic to endings. It wants openings, infinite ones. And your mind, trained for millennia to seek closure, keeps reaching toward that invisible edge. The place where you'll finally feel complete. Whole. Finished. But there is no edge. Only curve. Only next. Only another step in a loop that never planned to release you. This is what you carry into bed with you. Not exhaustion. But accumulated debt. Every notification you didn't check. Every to-do left hanging. Every conversation half-written in your head. Your mind doesn't separate real from unreal. It simply catalogs unfinished intent. And it expects you to pay. Not with money. But with attention. With time. With presence you no longer have access to. Because every open loop is a line of credit in your dopamine ledger. And until you close it, the system keeps spending. You can feel this debt physically. The mental clutter that buzzes under your skin. The sudden memory of something small you forgot, and the sharp panic it brings. The way your thoughts skip like scratched records. The way sleep becomes negotiation, not surrender. You're not failing. You're carrying too many tabs in your mind. And none of them will close themselves. Here's the twist. You were taught to see this as drive. The hunger to do more, fix more, become more. Was branded as discipline. As passion. As success. But dopamine doesn't understand contentment. It only understands difference. Not how far you've come. But how far you could go. And as long as there's room to move, it will urge you to fill it. With action. With worry. With anything but peace. Because peace is where movement dies. And dopamine, at its core, is a celebration of motion. Even your goals, noble as they may seem, are often just prettier names for the same old pattern. I want to be healthy. I want to make art. I want to fix my relationship. I want to understand myself. The words change. The hunger doesn't. And every step forward becomes another reason to keep going. Another metric to optimize. Another graph to improve. You are never done. And at night, when the body asks for stillness, the mind argues. But we haven't earned it yet. Because dopamine has convinced you that sleep is a checkpoint. Not a right. But here's the quiet danger. If sleep becomes the reward at the end of doing enough, you will never sleep peacefully. Because enough keeps changing. Because the loop keeps moving. Because the bar was designed to rise each time you touch it. Dopamine systems are not built to say, stop. They're built to say, better. And, better, never settles. So the more you seek to earn sleep, the further away it drifts. You fall into a rhythm of conditional rest. I'll sleep when I've finished this. I'll sleep when they text me back. I'll sleep when I feel okay again. I'll sleep when I've solved it. But the moment isn't coming. Not because you're broken. But because the system was never built to deliver that moment. This is the architecture of modern fatigue. We're not just tired. We're perpetually preparing to arrive. And arrival keeps slipping away. So what do? Not escape. Not force. Not punish ourselves into collapse. We redefine what it means to be finished. We stop treating completion as a solved equation. And start seeing it as a chosen frame. A moment we declare as enough. Not because everything is resolved. But because we refuse to pay with any more of our life. Let that sink in. You are allowed to end the day. Even if it's messy. Even if it's unfinished. Even if you're still afraid. You are allowed to sleep without closure. Without answers. Without control. The mind will scream. The loops will twitch. The dopamine circuits will beg. But you can choose not to act. Not to click. Not to reimagine. Not to reach. And in that refusal, that gentle rebellion, the system begins to quiet. Not because it wants to. But because it learns. You won't pay anymore. You don't need to finish the story before you sleep. You don't need to win the argument in your head. You don't need to complete the loop. The story will still be there tomorrow. The craving will return. But for now, you can leave the window open. You can let the page be incomplete. Because the end of the day is not a reward. It's a ritual. A boundary. A full stop that does not require permission. And if dopamine whispers, but what if? You can whisper back. Let it wait. Because this isn't the time for becoming. This is the time for unbecoming. For slipping beneath the calculations. For being no one, going nowhere. For letting the currency of unfinished time lose its value. And in that surrender, you give the debt back to the machine. You keep your peace. There's a moment, not long after the lights go out, when your mind tries to split itself. Half of it begins the long fall into sleep. The other half begins working. It doesn't feel like labor at first. It feels like remembering. Or maybe organizing. Or maybe rehearsing, like a play you weren't told you'd auditioned for. You lie still, but you're already elsewhere. Running simulations. Trying out different futures. Cataloging old mistakes like they're artifacts from a life not quite lived correctly. This is not random. This is not imagination. This is the dopamine system, still firing. Still looking, still dreaming, but awake. Most people think of dreaming as something that happens after sleep. In REM, when the brain loosens its grip on order and allows the subconscious to paint in abstractions. But the truth is harder. And stranger. The dreaming doesn't wait. It starts the moment you stop performing. The moment your outer world quiets, your inner incentive system surges. Because sleep is the first thing your dopamine system sees as an obstacle, not a danger, not an enemy, but a kind of problem. How do we maintain momentum when the body wants to disappear? And dopamine, faithful servant of seeking, responds in the only way it knows how. It creates demand where none exists. You don't want to think about that thing they said to you last week. You don't want to rehearse your response. You don't want to relive your failures. But the system doesn't care. Because those thoughts have value. Not emotional value, but reward potential. What if thinking about it gives you an edge? What if solving it now protects you later? What if understanding it fully changes something forever? Dopamine isn't hunting for comfort. It's hunting for outcomes. And outcomes can be manufactured from even the smallest regrets. There's a lie we tell ourselves when we can't sleep. That if we just think a little more, we'll be free. If we just run through the sequence again, the loop will close. But dopamine doesn't want the loop to close. It is the loop. The unfinished promise. The gap between action and satisfaction. The closer you get to clarity, the more angles your mind finds. You are not thinking. You are feeding. Feeding a machine that was built not to resolve problems, but to sustain motivation. And motivation doesn't survive silence. So it fills the silence with whispers. That's the moment when sleep becomes dangerous. Not in the physical sense, but in the way a fragile thing becomes dangerous when it's just out of reach. You feel it, that edge of surrender, the pull downward, the soft blur around your thoughts. The body says yes. But the mind says, just one more thing, and you're back, lit by the flicker of a new thought, a memory, a what if. Back inside the architecture of striving. This is not weakness. This is not restlessness. This is the core function of dopamine, to prevent closure when opportunity is sensed. And your own thoughts, especially the unresolved ones, are infinite little opportunities. There's a term in psychology for this, reward prediction error. It's what happens when the brain expects a reward and doesn't get it. Or gets more than expected. That discrepancy becomes fuel. Dopamine spikes when things are uncertain. When there's something to be learned. When there's an edge to explore. Your thoughts, unspoken, unacted, unresolved, become the perfect lab. And the lab stays open, even when the lights are off. You're not haunted by thoughts. You're haunted by their incompleteness. A face you didn't understand. A sentence you never said. A decision you postponed too long. These are the loose threads dopamine cannot resist, because it was never designed to understand time. It doesn't know it's 1:43 a.m. It doesn't care that the task is fictional, or ancient, or irrelevant. It sees only the potential to resolve, to win, to find. And so it tries. And so you stay awake. There's a cruelty to this. Not intentional, just mechanical. The mind, evolved for a world of physical scarcity and survival uncertainty, now runs its reward circuits on abstract suffering. It doesn't need real predators anymore. It needs only possibilities. And the brain, unguarded, alone, unsupervised in the dark, begins to conjure them. You think you're just thinking. But you're manufacturing unresolved futures. And each one earns a dopamine drip. Each one sustains the loop. Sleep becomes impossible. Not because the body won't allow it. But because the brain refuses to abandon hope. Hope, twisted by the wrong machinery, is just another addiction. So what does this mean? Do you silence the system? Do you fight it? Suppress it? No. You witness it. You learn to let the thoughts rise without running toward them. You stop trying to solve. You stop feeding the loop. You stop negotiating with dopamine's logic. Because it will never declare satisfaction. That's not its job. That's yours. And sleep is the act of declaring enough. Even when nothing feels finished. You might think, if I don't solve it now, it will follow me. If I don't run through it, it will wait for me tomorrow. Maybe. But that's tomorrow's fire. And tonight, is made of water. Let the lab go dark. Let the simulations glitch and fade. If the machine dreams while you're awake, then let sleep be the place where the machine is not invited. Here's the quiet miracle. The moment you stop believing that thinking is a prerequisite for safety, the system starts to lose its grip. You're not failing to sleep. You're choosing not to obey. And that resistance, soft, calm, still, is the first real act of rest. Let your last thought tonight be incomplete. Let your last breath be unmeasured. Let the machine go on without you. Because you are not its operator. Not tonight. You are not the hunger. Not the loop. Not the endless what if. You are the one who watches the searchlight dim. And finally, let's go. There is a moment, long before sleep, deeper than relaxation, when stillness stops being a task, and starts becoming a shape. You don't achieve it. You don't unlock it with the right supplement or soundtrack or sleep posture. It happens when something inside you breaks in the right direction. Not like a collapse, but a quiet surrender of effort. A dissolving. A shedding. A willingness to be nothing in particular. And in that strange permission, the hunt stops. Because the shape of stillness is not absence. It is refusal. Refusal to answer the hunger. Refusal to keep being someone. Dopamine doesn't know what to do with this. Because it's not built to not want. It runs on difference, on comparison, on forward movement. It can measure loss and gain, predict reward, calculate distance to goal. But it cannot comprehend stillness as a goal in itself. Because stillness is not a reward. It is the removal of the game board. And for a moment, as you let yourself drift into it, you notice, it's not empty here. The absence of seeking reveals something strange. Beneath the wanting, beneath the thought loops, beneath the ache to improve or explain, there is a quiet intelligence. Not the brains, something older, something that doesn't talk in language or images, something that doesn't plan. It watches. It waits. And it remembers, not with thoughts, but with presence. That's what the shape of stillness is. The return of something that was always there, just hidden behind the noise of next. You've lived your whole life under the weight of forward. Move forward, grow forward, think forward. Sleep, even, has been marketed to you as fuel to go further. But now you are being asked to go nowhere. And nowhere has no dopamine value. Because nowhere can't be monetized, can't be tracked, can't be hacked. Stillness is not a means to an end. It is a place. And the map to it begins. When you stop asking for a destination, let's be honest, you don't want to fall asleep. You want to be allowed to fall asleep. To be given permission, by something internal. That says, you're safe. You're done. You may stop now. But that voice, it rarely comes. Because somewhere along the way, you replaced enough with not yet. And not yet is the voice of dopamine itself. It tells you there's one more thing to fix. One more tab open. One more sentence in the conversation you've been having with the past. One more angle from which to view your own life. But you are not here to edit the day. You are here to release it. Stillness doesn't ask for silence. It doesn't ask for certainty. It only asks for one thing. Stop managing your experience. Let the thoughts come. Let the memories rise. But do not feed them. Do not analyze. Do not narrate. Do not justify why they're here. Watch them like birds crossing a gray sky. You don't have to name them. You don't have to follow. Just let them pass. This is not meditation. This is abandoning the architecture of needing to win the moment. Your dopamine system has spent years convincing you that sleep is something to be earned. Something to optimize. To biohack. To get better at. But sleep is not performance. It's not an achievement. It's not a metric. It's a return. A melting. A reabsorption into the quiet you once knew as a child. Before you were taught that your value was measured in velocity. Remember that? That child who could stare at dust falling through sunlight and feel no urgency at all. That was stillness. That was unmeasured being. And it was yours, before the world taught you how to reach. So tonight, don't reach. Let your mind flicker. Let it try to bait you with headlines, to-dos, embarrassments. It's just reflex. It's not truth. The system was built to keep you alive, not to help you rest. And it will cry out. But not every cry needs an answer. Let the ache for completion remain unanswered. Let the argument with your old self go unresolved. Let the future stay unplanned. You are not wasting time. You are leaving the currency. Here's what stillness sounds like. If you really listen. The hum of your own pulse in your ears. The gentle unevenness of your breath. The microscopic shifts of muscle as your body repositions itself not for comfort, but out of an ancient instinct to survive night. But this night doesn't want to eat you. It just wants to hold you. And it can't do that while you're still performing wakefulness in your mind. So be unremarkable. Be undone. Be unfinished. The night will not punish you for it. There's something sacred about letting yourself be nothing. No role. No progress. No narrative. Just skin against cotton. Air in your lungs. Time, without pressure. You might not get it perfect. You might think again. You might start chasing the thought. But each time you catch yourself, you can soften. You can pause. You can say, bluntly, I'm allowed to stop. That phrase alone, I'm allowed to stop, might be the most radical act you've taken all day. So much of modern life teaches us that meaning is found in acceleration. In doing more. Fixing more. Becoming more. But meaning has another face. It lives in the moment that doesn't need to be remembered. Sleep is not the result of fixing everything. It's the letting go of the idea that everything was ever yours to fix. And stillness. The real kind. The kind that invites the dream state to enter through the back door. Does not come when you finally control your thoughts. It comes when you no longer identify with them. They're just weather. And you're the sky. If tonight, you remember nothing else, remember this. You were not designed to outrun your own biology. You were not designed to outthink rest. Your brain, your system, your dopamine circuits. They're trying to protect you. That's all. Even now, even in error. But safety is not the same as motion. And rest is not the same as defeat. You do not have to be in motion to matter. You do not have to reach to be worthy. You do not have to achieve to be allowed to drift. Tonight. You are not a project. You are not a puzzle. You are not a process. You are just a presence. Slowly dimming the lights. Inside the machine. There is no ritual for this. No chant, no breath count, no perfect pillow position that tells the body, you may disappear now. Because disappearance is not something the body grants, it's something the mind allows. And the mind, especially a mind trained by the machinery of dopamine, is slow to release its grip. It doesn't know how to vanish. It only knows how to continue. You felt this. The long tail of the day following you into darkness. A comment that won't unstick. A song looped involuntarily. A phantom vibration in your pocket. Your body is horizontal, but your identity is still vertical, still upright in a space that doesn't know it's night. Because when you've spent years measuring your worth by presence, by performance, participation, reaction, non-presence feels like erasure. And we've been taught that erasure is failure. But sleep is a kind of holy erasure. It does not steal your life. It returns it. Returns the parts of you frayed thin by attention. The corners pulled tight by effort. The soft tissues of thought bruised from friction. Sleep doesn't repair what's broken. It removes what never needed to be held so tightly in the first place. And to receive that gift, you have to do something almost unnatural. Allow yourself to be no one. That's the fear underneath modern insomnia. Not that we'll be tired. But that in sleeping, we'll become invisible. Like if we're not watching the world. We'll be forgotten by it. Or worse, we'll miss the chance to be better. Better rested, better informed, better prepared. Dopamine whispers that you'll rest easier after you fix something. After you send the email. After you double-check the alarm. After you, just make sure. But it's a trick. There is always one more, just. And every time you reach for it, you reassert your identity as someone who must remain in control. Sleep requires the opposite. To sleep, you must be willing to vanish. To fade. To loosen your grip on your name, your story, your hungers. Not abandon them. Just place them down, gently, like wet clothes after rain. There's no resolution here. No gold star for resting well. No applause when the current takes you. There's just a slow dissolve. And in that dissolve, your first real freedom in days. Let's name the barrier clearly. It's not stimulation. It's not blue light. It's not caffeine or background noise or a late dinner. It's residual identity. The part of you that believes being conscious means being valid. That your value evaporates if you stop thinking. That every quiet moment must be filled. You've been rewarded for this. For always being aware. Always checking. Always responding. The system called you productive, efficient, responsible. But the system doesn't care that you're breaking. That you've forgotten how to sleep without the weight of 1,000 invisible obligations pressing against your chest. It just keeps feeding your attention to the loop. Because attention is currency. And sleep doesn't pay. And still, every night, something deeper in you tries. Even after all the checking and scrolling and overthinking. Even after all the rituals and distraction. You lie down. You close your eyes. You try to vanish. But vanishing isn't something you try. It's something you cease resisting. You don't push your way into rest. You sink. Like a ship slipping into fog. Not broken, not lost. Just done navigating for now. And yes, dopamine resists that. It flares against the fog. It wants clarity. It wants action. It wants forward. It wants you to maintain your edges. Because identity is something it uses to decide what matters. And sleep erases edges. That's what makes it sacred. Not the dreams. Not the healing. But the fact that for a few hours, you're allowed to not be anything. No ambition. No task. No role to uphold. Just the hum of blood. The weight of blankets. The rhythm of a planet that spins whether you perform or not. Ask yourself this, gently. When was the last time you believed you could disappear without consequence? Not die. Not leave. Just. Not perform. When was the last time you felt the world could go on? Without your thoughts holding it together. You don't need to answer. Just know this. Sleep is that trust. Made physical. The trust that the world does not collapse when you are not watching it. That the self doesn't vanish when you stop narrating it. That your worth is not stored in your wakefulness. In that trust, something shifts. You stop rehearsing. You stop scanning. You stop trying to prepare for a moment that's already gone. And in its place, stillness. Not the stillness of nothing happening, but the stillness of not needing to happen anymore. That's when the body begins to loosen its grip. The breath deepens. The heartbeat slows, not in surrender, but in permission. Permission to not matter, for just a little while. Because matter, as dopamine defines it, means relevance, urgency, consequence. Sleep is the rejection of all three. Tonight, you don't have to matter. You don't have to impress or plan or solve. You don't have to hold the thread of your story. You can put it down. It'll still be there in the morning. Your ambitions, your anxieties, your search for meaning. Dopamine will wait. It always does. It doesn't sleep. It doesn't vanish. But you can. And in doing so, you remind the system. You are not its servant. You are not the loop. Not the prediction model. Not the algorithm it rides like a wave. You are the ocean beneath it. And oceans know how to be still. Let tonight be the night you remember how to not exist. Not in fear. Not in emptiness. But in softness. You're not turning off. You're returning. Not to some sacred inner child. Not to a higher self. Just to the version of you that doesn't have to try. The one who can let the curtain fall. The one who knows how to close the book without reading the final page. Because some endings don't need to be earned. Only accepted. Let yourself vanish. Let the static die down. Let the mirror go dark. You are still here. Even when you are not. You didn't invent the hunger. You inherited it. The mind you carry into bed each night. Restless, recursive, always scanning. Isn't just yours. It's a design passed down. Coded into the tissue of your biology. And reinforced by centuries of survival. Where stillness was often mistaken for danger. The twitch behind your eyes. The pulse that refuses to slow. The endless tug of what else. These aren't symptoms of weakness. They are echoes. Echoes of a species that learned, somewhere between predator and firelight, that vigilance was safer than peace. And dopamine was the whisper that kept us moving. In the ancient world, the ones who paused too long didn't pass their genes forward. To hesitate was to be hunted. To stop searching was to starve. To sleep too deeply was to not wake up. So we evolved not to relax, but to balance on the edge of readiness. Even now, surrounded by locked doors, glowing screens, and curated comforts, our minds still brace for danger that will never come. Because the code hasn't updated. It still interprets every unresolved sound, every unanswered email, every phantom buzz, as a flicker of threat. And the reward? Not calm, but action. Dopamine rewards anticipation, not safety, not stillness. Just the sense that something might happen soon. So when you lie awake, telling yourself it's ridiculous to be so alert, know this. Your brain thinks it's helping. It's trying to protect you with thought. It's trying to keep you alive through mental rehearsal. And yes, it's wrong. But it's also doing exactly what it was built for. The system wasn't meant for peace. It was meant for preparation. Sleep, to a dopamine-trained brain, looks a lot like exposure. And that's why rest requires something more radical than comfort. It requires disobedience. To rest in this world is to break instinct. To lie down and not reach. To drift and not narrate. To stop checking, fixing, managing, preparing. Is to defy the very circuitry that once kept your ancestors alive. And the system fights back. Not with violence. With subtlety. It sends you thoughts in the voice of your own mind. Small ones. Reasonable ones. You should check that. You forgot to respond. That conversation might have meant more than you thought. It doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. Because urgency doesn't require volume. It only requires plausibility. Here's the paradox. The better your life becomes, the more reason the mind finds to stay alert. You have more to lose. More to protect. More loose threads that feel like they matter. And dopamine, designed to seek opportunity, treats opportunity and risk as twins. Every potential gain becomes a potential threat, not because it is, but because it could be. And the mind, caught in the loop, turns every delay into suspense. Sleep becomes the villain. The thing that might make you miss something. The thing that might let life continue, without your input. And so the inheritance continues. You are no longer being chased by wolves. But you check your phone like you are. You're not searching for food. But you scroll like nourishment is always one post away. You're not surrounded by immediate threat. But your nervous system hums like it is. Because urgency is no longer circumstantial. It's cultural, manufactured. And dopamine is the raw material. It's not just a molecule now. It's a product, a lever, a tool used by industries who understand that anticipation sells better than satisfaction. And you, the user, the consumer, the participant, have been trained not just to tolerate anticipation, but to prefer it. So even when the day is over, even when nothing is left to solve, the system inside you keeps scanning, not for danger, but for possibility. Possibility, as it turns out, is enough to keep you awake forever. Here's the part they don't tell you. You can't outthink this. You can't reason your way past a system older than language. But you can see it. And in seeing it, you gain the tiniest crack of freedom. You stop mistaking the thought for the truth. You stop mistaking the urgency for a command. You stop mistaking the pull for a you. Because it's not you. It's a chemical tide. It's a residue of evolution. It's a loop written long before you were born. And while you can't silence it, you don't have to obey it. Sleep is not the reward at the end of action. It's the pause that makes action possible. But we've forgotten how to pause. Not because we're weak. Because we're overconditioned. Every ping is a rehearsal. Every glance is a prediction. Every delay is tension. You've been trained to fill every gap. Even the ones meant to cradle you. And rest, true rest, is not about collapse. It's about refusing to answer the call. Even when the call comes in your own voice. So tonight, when the thoughts begin, not loud, but consistent, recognize them for what they are. Inheritance, not prophecy. You are not responsible for their urgency. You are not obligated to believe their importance. You can watch them rise like steam from a boiling pot. And not reach for the handle. You can hear the whisper of dopamine saying, "Stay ready." And reply, "Not tonight. You're not in danger. You're not behind. You're not being chased anymore. That system still lives in you. But you don't have to live by it. You can lie still. Not because everything is solved. Not because everything is safe. But because you are done pretending that hypervigilance is a virtue. It isn't. It's a scar. And tonight, you don't have to keep scratching it. Let it be. Let the urgency pass through you like weather. Let the inheritance end. Just for now. With you. The world will continue spinning. The messages will wait. The story will unfold without your watchful gaze. And your body, your tired, magnificent body, already knows the path back. Back to the deep, to the dark, to the quiet place, where nothing is needed from you. No plans, no progress, no performance, just the soft permission. To fall, to float, to fade. There's something in you that never learned to land. Not because it's broken, but because it was never taught how. It rises each morning with a plan. It accelerates before your eyes fully open. It pushes you through tasks, through conversations, through flashes of meaning stitched between checkmarks. And even as you slow your steps at night, even as you tuck your body into softness, this something remains upright. It doesn't recognize rest as a destination. To it, sleep is a speed bump, not a stop sign. It is the engine. And it was built, not to pause, but to continue. You know it well. The internal pressure to do one more thing. The resistance to closure. The strange guilt in stillness. It speaks in small suggestions. Did I do enough today? Should I have said that differently? What if I forgot something important? But these aren't thoughts. They're momentum echoes. The residual hum of a machine that doesn't know how to shut itself off. This is what dopamine has become in modern time. Not just the fuel for action, but the refusal to disengage. It rewards the forward. It punishes the full stop. And slowly, we forget what stopping ever felt like. We built a world in its image. Endless feeds, no natural conclusions, no curtain between day and night. Everything continues, everything updates, everything waits to be checked, replied to, resume. Even pleasure has been converted into performance. Even rest is measured, tracked, analyzed for efficiency. You close your eyes not to drift, but to optimize recovery. Sleep becomes another thing to improve. Another lever in the machinery of personal development. But you are not a machine. And stillness does not answer to metrics. somewhere in your mind. The engine waits, not hostile, just confused. It believes you're still in motion. That there's more to process, more to handle. That stopping now would be irresponsible, because it's been trained, not by trauma, but by design, to believe that action equals safety. That vigilance equals virtue. And when you lie in bed, doing nothing, thinking nothing, becoming nothing, the engine panics. It flares dopamine into the system, not to help you, but to remind you that stopping is unnatural, at least, to the machine. This is the cost of constant stimulation. We no longer know how to finish, only how to delay. We push pause, we minimize tabs, we save for later. But finishing, truly closing something, has become rare. And the engine hates that, because it was built to chase ends. When there are none, it loops, it tries again. It restarts the task in the background of your mind, over and over, like a ghost program refusing to shut down. And each loop releases a drop of dopamine, just enough to keep you tethered, just enough to make rest feel like a missed opportunity. You might think you're just an overthinker, or that you need more discipline, or that something's wrong with your routine, but what if the problem isn't you? What if it's the culture of endless engagement you were dropped into? What if your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do? In a world that no longer honors the concept of done, a world where there is no finish line, only update, refresh, repeat, and in that loop, dopamine has been repurposed into something tragic. A leash with no destination. Think about this. How many things in your life truly conclude? A task may be completed, but then replaced. A message may be sent, but then seen, and must be answered. A goal may be reached, but then doubled. There's no ceremony, no finality, and so the mind, taught to seek satisfaction through achievement, spins endlessly through almosts. It never lands. It only circles, and circles are not restful. They are hypnotic. This is why you can lie in a perfect bed, with a silent phone, a dark room, and still feel haunted, not by fear, not by pain, but by unexpressed momentum, by an engine that forgot what parking feels like. Sleep asks you to go limp, to power down, to let go of the wheel and trust that the road beneath you will still exist in the morning. But momentum hates trust. It insists that vigilance is the only way to maintain safety, that forward is the only safe direction. And dopamine, in its innocent devotion to progress, keeps stepping on the gas, even as you beg for brakes. So what then? How do you stop the engine without breaking it? You don't. You don't try to stop it. You step out of it. You let it idle. You let it run, without feeding it commands. You let the momentum carry itself out. Because every time you don't respond to the urge to think, to solve, to optimize, you drain fuel from the loop. You stop investing in movement. And over time, the machine slows, not from resistance, but from neglect. Not from suppression, but from disinterest. Dopamine isn't evil. It's not trying to trap you. It's just directionally blind. It doesn't know when to stop because it wasn't built to know. That's your job. To listen to the signal. And choose when to follow. And tonight, you can choose not to. You can hear the call for another loop. Another thought. Another plan. Another scroll. And stay still. Not because you're being lazy, but because you finally understand. The engine is not the destination. You don't need to fix everything before you sleep. You don't need to answer every signal. You don't need to earn rest by running the tank empty. You are not the machine. You are not the motion. You are the moment when motion ceases to matter. And in that moment, you return to something ancient. The state before seeking. The awareness before effort. The self before wanting. This is not defeat. It is the truest kind of arrival. And when you land, soft, undeserving, unfinished, you will find the stillness was never waiting. It was always there. You just had to stop long enough to feel it. You were almost asleep. You felt it, the gentle unraveling. Your breath was beginning to slow, thoughts slipping like sand through parted fingers. Then it came. A single thought, quiet but sharp, cutting through the fog. Did you forget something? It doesn't shout. It never needs to. Just the faint suggestion. An echo, not loud enough to startle, but precise enough to pull you back. And before you realize what's happened, you're awake again. Not physically, but mentally reattached to the loop. The loop you swore you left behind. It happens like this for most people. Not in a crash, but in a drift. You don't fall back into thought. You slide. And at the center of that slide is dopamine, not as a spike, but as a whisper. A chemical echo, calling you back to motion, not because you're in danger. Not because there's a reward. But because the system doesn't know how to stop anticipating. Even in sleep. Even in dreams. Your brain is scanning for open loops. Tasks unclosed. Stories unfinished. Selfhood unresolved. Because to dopamine, rest is not peace. It is abandonment. And abandonment, to a brain evolved to survive by prediction, feels like failure. That's why it doesn't stop at bedtime. Why even the exhausted mind, after a long day of trying, keeps chewing on thoughts it can't digest. Because we were taught, somewhere beneath language, beneath culture, that to stop watching is to stop existing. We didn't choose this. We inherited it. And dopamine made it sustainable. It became the tether. The signal that says, stay alert. You're not done yet. There's something deeply human in that call. It isn't malicious. It isn't manipulative. It's just loyal. A loyal echo of everything you've ever left incomplete. Every emotional cliffhanger. Every unsaid apology. Every choice you postponed. You try to silence it. You hum. You breathe deep. You repeat mantras. You count backwards from 100. But the echo doesn't respond to quiet. It responds to attention. If you so much as glance toward it. It grows. It loops. Not because you're failing. But because the loop believes it's protecting you. Sleep, to the echo, looks like a mistake. Like giving up on the hunt. So it brings you back. Just a little. Just enough. Not to keep you awake. But to keep you available. Available for reflection. For preparation. For the chance that a resolution might still arrive. That's what makes it dangerous. Not the loudness. But the almostness. Because the echo doesn't need to win. It only needs to remind you that maybe, just maybe, you're not finished yet. You might wonder why your mind always reaches backward at night. Why old embarrassments surface. Why conversations from years ago reappear with fresh detail. It's not sentimentality. It's not punishment. It's your brain performing deferred maintenance. Dopamine is not just future-focused. It's also a custodian of the unresolved past. It reactivates moments that still carry emotional charge. Especially ones you couldn't fix when they first occurred. Because unfinished emotional narratives are interpreted by the brain as tasks. And tasks mean potential. And potential means dopamine. So your quiet, resting mind becomes a theater of emotional rehearsal. And the echo directs the stage. It says, what if you had said it differently? What if they misunderstood you? What if this is your last chance to make sense of that moment? And even though you're horizontal, even though you thought you were ready for sleep, you begin to play out the scene. Again, and again, until the dopamine wears off. Until the loop grows tired. Until your system finally admits, there's no resolution to be found. But by then, you're awake again. Not by accident. By design. This isn't a failure of will. It's the structure of memory and reward converging in the dark. Sleep is chemically hostile to unresolved thought. That's why deep sleep only begins when the loop surrenders. When the echo stops being fed. And you cannot force surrender. You can only withdraw reinforcement. That's the shift. Not to argue with the thought. Not to push it away. But to let it pass through unengaged. You don't quiet the echo by silencing it. You quiet it by no longer answering. This requires a skill that few are taught. Logical non-response. The ability to let a thought pass by without attaching to it. To feel its tug and still refuse to lean in. To hear the internal, what if? And answer with nothing. Not apathy. Not rejection. Just stillness. The kind of stillness that doesn't deny the past. But doesn't offer it your present either. You can remember without reliving. You can notice without solving. You can float without chasing. And that is the doorway. Through that doorway, the echo begins to fade. Not disappear. Just lose urgency. It becomes part of the background. Like the hum of a distant fridge. Still there. Still vibrating. But no longer calling. And in its place, a silence returns. Not the absence of sound. The absence of demand. The space where sleep begins, where your mind stops serving its own momentum, and starts surrendering to something larger, something deeper, something without tasks or targets, just the slow, descending spiral, into being. Tonight, when the echo arrives, and it will, don't brace, don't try to block it. Just meet it. Let it speak. Let it flicker. And then, let it go unanswered. It will try again. Of course it will. But the echo can only survive as long as you believe it matters. As long as you keep checking the signal, hoping it contains something new. It never does. It never has. It is not a messenger. It's a mirror, reflecting your own habit of returning. But tonight, you can choose not to return. Let the thought hang. Let the loop remain open. Let the engine idle. Let the door remain unclosed. You are allowed to sleep with unfinished thoughts. You are allowed to not reach closure. You are allowed to go dark. And in doing so, you teach your system something it forgot. Not every story needs an ending. Before the body is allowed to rest. Some echoes fade only after you stop listening. And some peace arrives only when you finally stop looking for it. There's a clock in your mind that doesn't match the one on your wall. It doesn't track time in minutes or hours. It tracks possibility. And possibility doesn't sleep. You feel it most clearly when the world quiets, when the lights go off and your devices dim, when the world finally leaves you alone. But your thoughts do not. Because your internal clock, governed by dopamine, doesn't ask what time it is. It asks what time it could be. What else you could still do. What else you could reach for if you just stayed awake a little longer. This is the lie of later. It's not just procrastination. It's not laziness or distraction. It's the myth that some moment just ahead of now will finally deliver relief, finally give you permission, finally settle everything. That if you think for 5 more minutes, you'll figure it out. If you scroll a little more, you'll find the thing that soothes you. If you solve just one more mental puzzle, the restlessness will lift. It never does. Because dopamine isn't designed to give you peace. It's designed to promise it. You've been trained to live in the shadow of the next thing. Trained to believe that every moment carries the potential to be the moment. The one that fixes it, explains it, resolves it, completes it. That's what the lie of later feeds on. The idea that rest must be earned through completion. And if you haven't finished something, if anything in your day feels emotionally unresolved, the mind will withhold sleep like it's withholding a gift you haven't paid for. But here's the truth dopamine hides. Later never comes. Because it isn't a place. It's a loop. A self-refreshing mirage. You never arrive at it. You only orbit it. You lie in bed, and the thoughts begin. Not because they're urgent. But because your system is still hungry. And hunger always finds a reason to keep chewing. Did you lock the door? Did you say something wrong in that meeting? Did you miss something important in that message you only half read? It doesn't matter how minor the thought. If there's any uncertainty, dopamine will tag it as incomplete. And what's incomplete must be processed. And what must be processed cannot be paused. So the loop runs. Not to solve. But to stay alive. It's survival, misapplied. Thousands of years ago, the loop kept you alert in the wild. It reminded you to check your surroundings. To finish the hunt. To make sure you didn't leave behind danger disguised as calm. But now the predators are digital. Conceptual. Emotional. They arrive as memory. As potential embarrassment. As stories that have no ending. And the loop responds to them as if your life depends on staying engaged. Dopamine can't tell the difference between a missed text and a missed threat. All it sees is an unresolved signal. All it knows is, do not sleep. Something's not finished. Here's the tragedy. Most of these thoughts aren't even worth answering. They don't lead to insight. They don't complete anything. They just repeat. But your mind, trained to worship momentum, treats repetition as urgency. It mistakes the familiarity of a thought for the importance of it. So the loop becomes its own justification. You think the thought because it matters. And it matters because you're thinking it. It's a closed circuit. And dopamine is the electricity. The lie of later tells you. You'll rest when it's resolved. You'll sleep when it's settled. You'll feel okay once you've mentally filed every moment of your day. But the mind is not a filing cabinet. It's a weather system. It doesn't get organized. It gets observed. And the more you try to control the storm, the longer it lingers. Because control is resistance. And resistance is dopamine's favorite meal. You don't escape the lie of later by speeding up. You escape it by unsubscribing. By telling the brain, I see the loop. I understand the bait. But I'm not biting tonight. Not because I don't care. But because caring doesn't require completion. Caring can coexist with letting go. Effort can coexist with surrender. And rest is not the opposite of striving. It is the boundary around it. The mind will try to negotiate. It always does. Just review your day one more time. Just check that notification. Just sketch out a plan for tomorrow. But that, just, never ends. It stretches the present into a treadmill, running without arriving. You have to step off. Not with violence. Not with suppression. But with clarity. You say, I am allowed to rest before the story is over. And in that sentence, the loop loses its fuel. There's a power in declaring a moment finished, even when it doesn't feel that way. Not because the moment was clean, but because you chose to stop cleaning it. You declared a line, a full stop, and the echo that says, but what if, has nowhere left to bounce, because you're no longer building the room it needs to survive. So tonight, don't promise yourself a better tomorrow. Don't make sleep the reward for a better version of today. Make sleep the right of the person you already are. Flawed. Messy. Unresolved. But done for now. The loop won't like it. It will pace. It will prod. It will send one more suggestion to the top of your mind. But you don't have to pick it up. You can let it slide past you like light through glass. Touching, but not holding. And if you wake up in the night, if the lie of later slips back in through the cracks, greet it like an old script. One you've read too many times to believe. Smile. Let the thought speak. Then let it float away. You are not its audience anymore. Because later doesn't need you. And sleep is not something you have to earn. It is something you reclaim. A space that belongs to you. Not the engine. Not the feed. Not the loop. Not the future. Just you. Here. Now. Unfinished. And finally, at rest. Sleep doesn't begin when you lie down. It doesn't begin when the lights go out, or the playlist of rain sound starts playing, or the digital clock flips to some socially acceptable bedtime. Sleep begins when you disappear from the loop. But here's the trick, the loop doesn't want you to go. It doesn't yell. It doesn't beg. It just continues. Soft, endless, familiar enough that it feels like you. But it's not. It's not you. It's just noise. Noise shaped like memory. Noise shaped like responsibility. Noise shaped like curiosity, worry, ambition, regret. Dopamine's great magic is this. It doesn't scream for attention. It becomes the thing you mistake for your own voice. You think you're just reflecting. Just planning. Just being honest with yourself before the day ends. But somewhere between the first thought and the 100th, you forget that none of it has to be done right now. Dopamine doesn't care if it's urgent. It just cares if it's unfinished. And your mind, trained to equate activity with value, will treat even the smallest scrap of thought as a thread that must be pulled, even as your body begs for rest. Because the loop is running. Because the noise is wearing your voice. And somewhere in the middle of it all, you lose track of what silence ever sounded like. Let's be precise here. Not poetic. Not abstract. You lie in bed. You close your eyes. And your mind offers you a review. Maybe it starts with your day. The conversation you fumbled. The expression on someone's face. The thing you said that was just slightly off. Then it jumps, to tomorrow, to what you forgot. To what you might forget. To how behind you are. To how uncertain everything is. Then it tells you that thinking about these things will help you prepare. That this is you, processing. That if you just run through it once more, you'll finally feel okay. But you won't. You've already run through it. Twice, 10 times, 1,000, and still, no peace. Because peace isn't found by resolving thoughts. It's found by not identifying with them. You think the loop is you. Because it uses your memories. Because it sounds like your inner narrator. Because it uses your concerns, your hopes, your unresolved sentences. But it's not you. It's the simulation of you. Powered by dopamine's refusal to stop searching. And the search doesn't have an end. It only has fuel. And your attention is the fuel. The more you feed it, the more the loop believes it's doing something important. But it's not solving. It's just repeating. There's a question you should start asking yourself in the quiet hours. What if none of these thoughts need me right now? Not forever. Not in denial. Not spiritual bypassing. Just, not right now. Not at 1:42 a.m. Not during the one sacred window when your system has finally slowed enough to start healing itself. You've survived the day. You've paid attention. You've carried the weight of being someone in a world that constantly asks more. And now, as your body begins to soften, the noise arrives in disguise, wearing the face of things that matter, wearing the voice of responsibility. But it's just noise, and you're allowed to ignore it. This isn't about positive thinking. It's not about replacing bad thoughts with good ones. That's still participation. That's still engagement. What you're learning is more radical than that. You're learning how to let thoughts pass without collecting them. Like watching leaves drift down a stream without fishing them out. Like letting a song play in the background without singing along. You are not the echo. You are not the pattern. You are not the loop. You are the space beneath it. And that space doesn't need answers, but dopamine has no use for that space, because that space doesn't offer new data. It doesn't promise reward. It doesn't invite resolution. It just is. And for a system obsessed with motion, just being feels like death. So it fills the space with movement, with suggestion, with reminders, with endless drafts of what you could have said, could have done, could still do tomorrow. Not because any of it is urgent, but because the loop only knows how to survive by continuing. And the only way to break the loop is not to stop the thoughts, but to stop believing them. Imagine this. A thought appears. It says, you forgot to respond to them. You don't fight it. You don't justify it. You don't respond at all. You let it arrive. You let it float. You let it pass. You don't build a conversation around it. You don't imagine their reaction. You don't begin a new internal monologue about how bad you are at keeping up. You just see the thought. And you let it leave. That's it. No resistance. No debate. Just space. Dopamine wants you to treat every thought as a call to action. But you're learning how to treat them like weather. Not a problem. Not a plan. Just passing phenomena. A twitch in the mind. A brief flicker of imagined urgency. And then, nothing. You don't lose your mind this way. You free it. And in that freedom, sleep becomes possible again. Not as a thing you earn. Not as a result of winning the mental battle. But as the natural consequence of not being at war with yourself. The noise that wears your voice will try again tomorrow. That's its job. But tonight, you don't have to answer. You don't have to listen like it's scripture. You don't have to fear it like it's prophecy. You don't have to believe it like it's truth. You can let it pass again and again and again, until the voice that once seemed like you becomes what it always was. Just sound. Just habit. Just an echo in the distance. And you, soft, unbothered, unhurried, finally drift beneath it. You're not here to finish the day. You're here to release it. Let the loop continue without you. Let the noise keep talking to itself. You are no longer required to listen. You are no longer participating in the game. And that silence that comes when you no longer believe the voice, is the threshold. You've been standing on it all along. You just forgot how to step through. So step. Let go. Let the noise collapse into itself. And let sleep reclaim what was always yours. There's a place just beyond thought. Not silence. Not sleep. Not yet. But something else, something in between. It feels like the moment just before rain. Or the second after a door clicks shut in a quiet house. A stillness not imposed, but offered. You don't enter it by force. You arrive there by forgetting that you were trying to get somewhere. It's not empty. It's full of pause, thick with waiting. But no one is watching. And here, right here, is where most people turn back. Because they don't recognize this pause as safety. They mistake it for absence, of control, of clarity, of identity. And dopamine, faithful to its ancient script, panics at that loss. It doesn't scream. It doesn't spark alarms. It just drops a thought into your mind like a pebble in water. You should be doing something. And the ripple begins again. The system re-engages. The loop starts to hum. The world returns in checklist form. And you, still hovering between worlds, get pulled back into gravity. Because in the culture of dopamine, nothing is more suspicious than peace. Let's name it for what it is. The pause between wake and sleep is unproductive. It does not make you smarter. It does not make you richer. It does not increase engagement. It cannot be tracked. It cannot be shared. It offers you nothing to hold. Except the one thing your system was never taught how to value: presence without purpose. Dopamine is a searchlight. It doesn't illuminate what is. It only tracks what might be. And when there is nothing left to scan, no new input, no next task, no unresolved stimuli, it turns inward, not to rest, but to simulate new shadows, because it cannot stand the dark. But this pause, this threshold, is the dark. It is the gentle black between moments, the long blink between one life and the next, and sleep does not come after it. Sleep is born from it. If you cannot linger here, you cannot cross over. You'll stay awake, waiting for sleep to arrive like a train on a schedule. But sleep is not a destination, it's a descent. And you can only descend by letting go of the rope you've been using to climb. The rope is dopamine. It's all the mental scaffolding that held you upright through the day. The predictions, the goals, the unfinished stories, the identity you performed in 100 small decisions. Letting go of that rope feels like falling. Like dying, even. Because for all of human history, stillness was dangerous. Stillness made you prey. And now, in a life where physical threat is rare, your brain still treats inactivity as a vulnerability, so it fills the stillness with phantom urgency, thoughts that sound like safety, worries that feel like protection, tasks that seem noble. But they're illusions. And the rope is not saving you. It's keeping you from the water. Here's the hard part. This descent feels wrong. It feels like forgetting, like irresponsibility, like losing grip. And every part of you conditioned by the loop will resist. You'll feel it as an itch. A tightening in the chest. A sudden certainty that now, right now, is the perfect time to remember something from 10 years ago. That's not memory. That's dopamine resisting erasure. It wants to continue. Because continuation feels like safety. And sleep is discontinuity. It's the courage to allow yourself to vanish. You weren't taught how to vanish. You were taught how to accumulate information, connections, followers, proof. You were taught that stillness is laziness. That not responding is failure. That disappearing, even for a few hours, means you'll fall behind. And dopamine reinforced every lesson. It rewarded you for checking, for responding, for staying alert long after alertness was useful. So now, when you try to sink, when you hover in that sacred space between motion and oblivion, your system interprets it as threat. And it calls you back. Not violently, just persistently. Like a soft tap on the shoulder. Come back. You're not done. But tonight, you are allowed to be done. Not forever. Just now. Just long enough to let your mind dissolve into something wordless. Long enough to let your breath lead instead of your thoughts. Long enough to remember what it feels like to be nothing but a body at rest. No one needs you right now. No decision must be made. No improvement must be achieved. You are not falling behind. You are falling in. Into the warm weightlessness of the pause. Into the quiet before the next thing. Into the space where the self forgets its own name. And finally stops whispering back to itself. What happens if you don't answer the thoughts tonight? What happens if the loop spins without your attention? What happens if the world continues? Without your witness. Without your preparation. Without your constant engagement. The truth is simple. It does. The world doesn't stop when you sleep. It doesn't need you to be vigilant in order to spin. And more importantly, your value doesn't disappear just because your thoughts go silent. You are not measured by your activity. You are not kept alive by your engagement. You are allowed to rest, without explaining yourself to your own mind. So when you feel the threshold approaching, when your thoughts begin to blur, when the colors of your inner world start to soften, don't tense, don't tighten around the last sentence, don't rewind, don't rehearse. Let the moment lose its shape. Let the definition bleed. Let the story end in the middle of a sentence. Because that's how sleep begins, not with a conclusion, but with a disappearance, of plot, of urgency, of the need to be aware. The final resistance will be small. One last thought. One last check. One last reminder that something, somewhere, is still open. That's the loop, asking for your attention like a child tugging at your sleeve. But you are not obligated to turn around. You can stay facing the fog. You can step forward without answers. And you will not vanish. You will arrive. In a place where the loop no longer follows. Where the voice no longer narrates. Where the engine no longer hums beneath your ribs. Only breath. Only warmth. Only the pause that finally holds. This is not sleep yet. But it's the edge of it. The breath before surrender. And all you have to do is not turn back. Don't answer the echo. Don't check the rope. Don't run the loop one more time. You are already crossing. Let yourself go. Sleep doesn't fall on you like a curtain. It gathers, slowly. A fog creeping in behind the thoughts, not replacing them, just making them harder to hold. You don't notice the moment you lose track of your body. You just realize it's been a while since you remembered you had one. Your hand goes numb. Not with discomfort, but with a kind of still forgetfulness. The spine softens. The feet lose their borders. And your name, spoken only in the quiet recesses of your mind, starts to dissolve into the air around you. This is the weightless place. The atmosphere between waking and oblivion. And it is sacred. But most of us never stay long enough to let it finish its work. Because the mind still believes in form. Even here. Even now. It wants to bring shape to the fog. Wants to explain this lightness, categorize it, document its presence so it can be stored and remembered. But the weightless place doesn't allow memory. It only allows melting. And dopamine, so comfortable in the architecture of structure, can't find its footing here. Because there are no levers. No puzzles. No progress to mark. Only drift. Only dissolve. The system begins to panic, quietly. It sends one last suggestion to the surface. A thought about tomorrow. A task. A vague concern with a familiar emotional flavor. It doesn't matter what it is. It's not the content that matters. It's the hook. And the hook is baited with self. Just enough, to draw your attention back into form. Just enough narrative to turn fog into structure. And for a moment, you reach. You bite. You lean forward into the loop. And the weight returns. The body remembers its edges. The name becomes real again. And the weightless place vanishes. This is the tragedy of modern exhaustion. We are not just tired. We are heavy. Heavy with identity. Heavy with obligation. Heavy with the stories we think we must carry all the way into unconsciousness. But sleep doesn't want your stories. It wants your absence. Not absence as erasure. Absence as unburdening. The letting go of the performance you've been giving all day. Even in your own head. Especially there. Think of it this way. Every thought is a tether. A strand that connects you to something. Someone. Some version of yourself. And each tether has weight. The image you're upholding. The work you haven't finished. The fear you're still rehearsing. The memory you're not ready to forgive. You may think you're lying still. But your mind is pulling dozens of threads in all directions. And with every thread, the body tenses. Even if you don't notice. Your chest tightens just slightly. Your fingers curl. Your jaw hums with invisible pressure. Not because of pain, but because of attachment. To reach the weightless place, you must cut the threads. Not violently. Not all at once. Just one at a time. You acknowledge the thought. You see it. You feel it tug. And you choose, gently, with no resistance, not to follow. The thread remains. But it no longer holds you. You float an inch higher. Then another. Then another. And eventually, there are no more tethers strong enough to keep you from the drift. This isn't detachment as coldness. It's not avoidance. It's trust. Trust that the world can continue spinning without your constant engagement. That the self can survive without performance. That the day can end without resolution. And trust is what dopamine doesn't know how to compute. Because dopamine is built to predict. To secure. To prepare. It sees trust as risk. And risk as weakness. But sleep is not the failure to protect. It's the willingness to be protected by something larger than your will. By the dark. By the breath. By the unspoken intelligence of the body when it's finally left alone. In the weightless place, your thoughts begin to lose shape. They smear into each other. They blend, repeat, mutate. And if you listen closely, you'll realize they're no longer built in your voice. They don't belong to the identity you wear by day. They are fragments, dream prelude, echoes of things you haven't lived. And still, dopamine sends one last signal. A final tether. A flicker of self-recognition. Was that important? The question tightens the muscles. The edges return. And the drift stops. Unless you let the question hang, unanswered. Not rejected. Not resolved. Just suspended. That's the skill. Not pushing thoughts away. Not burying them in forced mantras or numbing strategies. But letting them come. And refusing to attach. It's a discipline of unhooking. Not once. But continually. Every time the mind reaches for identity. You offer softness. Not silence. Not denial. Just space. And the space widens. Eventually, there comes a point. If you've resisted nothing. If you've obeyed no loop. If you've honored every thought by not reacting to it. Where something exquisite happens. The system gives up. Not in defeat. But in understanding. It realizes there's no task to complete. No loop to close. No reward to wait for. And so it quiets. Like a bird that stops flapping once it realizes the wind is enough. And in that surrender, you begin to descend. Not fall. Not drop. Descend. A word with weightless grace. A slow motion unbecoming. The mind, no longer interested in the game. The body, no longer identified with the player. Just presence, breath, soft unraveling. You're not asleep yet. But you've stopped trying to stay awake. And that's the moment. That's the door. That's where the weightless place becomes the doorway to real rest. You won't remember this moment. Not fully. It will blur like a watercolor left in the rain. But its effect will remain. Because tonight, you didn't escape your thoughts. You didn't conquer them. You didn't resolve your identity. You let it go quiet. And you floated, tetherless, into a dark that asked nothing from you. Except your absence. You are not what you thought. You are not what you remembered. You are not what you were trying to solve. You are the one who was always waiting underneath. And tonight, finally, you arrived, weightless, soft, gone. At some point in the night, you cross a line you don't remember stepping over. There's no sensation. No sound of a door creaking open. No change in color, temperature, or thought. Just the faintest slip. Like a thread pulled through fabric. A subtle pull behind the eyes. And you are no longer here. Not in the way you were. Not in the way the loop needs you to be. It keeps calling. But the self it's calling to is no longer listening. This is the real sleep. Not the shallow drift. Not the rehearsal. Not the prelude. The deep kind. The kind that erases the narrator. Leaves the story untold. And lets the silence grow wild in its place. And yet, you don't vanish. Not entirely. Some part of you stays. Not as identity. But as awareness without task. The quiet that survives you. Not the you who needs to be someone. Not the you that plans and fears and calculates meaning. But the baseline. The original hum. The part that was there before the world taught you to chase. Before dopamine dressed every second in urgency. That presence remains. Not watching. Just being. And from there, the real restoration begins. We like to think of sleep as a reset. Like turning off a machine so it can boot up again. But real sleep is not a shutdown. It's a return. To something older than language. To a rhythm that pulses beneath your personality. To a circuitry untouched by your goals, regrets, or name. You don't fix yourself in sleep. You shed yourself. And what's left? What remains when the hunger for more has gone silent? Is something closer to peace than the loop ever allowed. Not the peace of having solved everything. But the peace of no longer needing to. Even here. Even in this deep quiet. Dopamine doesn't fully die. It slows. It dims. It waits. Because it is patient. Because it is part of you. And when you rise again. When morning breaks open behind your eyelids. It will stir before you do. It will be ready. Ready to give you purpose. Ready to offer you levers. Ready to help you become again. That's not evil. That's nature. But it is, loud. And after a night like this, you'll hear the volume differently. You'll remember what existed beneath it. The silence you fell into didn't ask you to be useful. Didn't evaluate your worth. Didn't measure your output. It just held you. Like earth holding seed. Like sky holding dusk. Like breath holding space between its own inhale and exhale. And in that holding, your nervous system unclenched. Your heartbeat, long entrained to the rhythm of urgency, finally stepped off the metronome. Your cells didn't collapse, they opened. This is why true sleep feels like something more than rest. Because it is. It's undoing. Not breaking, but releasing. You are a creature of patterns, thought loops, anticipation cycles, prediction reflexes. Dopamine is the architect of that cathedral of momentum. And when you are awake, you are almost always worshipping at that altar, knowingly or not. But when you sleep like this, you step outside the temple. You walk into the forest beyond your habits, into a silence not shaped by algorithms, into the territory that remembers what it means to exist without justification, where stillness is not failure, and desire is not duty. Most people will never get here. Not because they're incapable, but because they've forgotten how to lose control without panic. They've learned that identity must be maintained, even in the dark, even in unconsciousness. They grind through the edge of sleep, still gripping the handles of their life. But you have begun to let go. Not as surrender, as return, as remembrance that your existence is not conditional, that you are not just the loop, that beneath every hunger lives a quiet not waiting to be earned, only accepted. And when you wake, whenever that is, you might not remember much. You won't remember the moment you fell, or what happened after. You might not even remember how the last thought faded. But you will feel something. Not clarity, not inspiration, something quieter than that. Like a breath that stretches deeper than usual, like time moving slower for a few minutes, like being slightly less interested in chasing something for no reason. And that feeling is the echo of the quiet that survived you. The silence that slipped between the threads of your thinking. The calm that never asked for your name. Let it linger. Let it shape the way you pick up your phone. The way you speak. The way you listen. The way you return to the system without becoming it. Let it remind you that not every impulse deserves action. That not every loop needs fuel. That not every goal requires your blood. You will re-enter the world. Of course you will. But maybe this time, you carry less of its weight. Because now you know, underneath the hunt, beyond the noise, past the dopamine-glazed horizon of becoming, there is a silence that doesn't want anything from you. And it waits, every night, for your return. Sleep is not escape. It is reunion. With a self untouched by performance. With a space immune to metrics. With a stillness immune to demand. And that reunion, brief as it may be, changes you. Because it shows you what's real. What's been there the whole time. The breath you don't have to earn. The worth that doesn't expire. The self that doesn't shatter when it's not being shaped. So go. Let the world continue without you. Let the loops run out of questions. Let dopamine wait outside the door. Because you are already gone. And something softer is dreaming in your place. There is a moment after deep sleep when the self begins to reassemble. Not all at once. Not with words. But with weight. The body remembers gravity. The mind remembers its name. And the quiet that held you begins to loosen, gently, like fingers unthreading from yours in the dark. You're not fully back yet. But you're becoming. And becoming, after true rest, feels different. Less urgent, less sharp, less bound by the echo of the loop. For a few fragile minutes, you are still half-dream, still part of the silence that asked nothing of you. Still a passenger in your own skin. This is the shape of returning. When the self comes home to the body without carrying the burden of identity just yet. And for once, you don't rush to pick it all up again. You don't immediately check the list. You don't replay yesterday. You don't brace for tomorrow. You float, through breath, through light, through the slow reawakening of nerve endings that forgot, for a while, what it meant to tense. There's a stillness in you that wasn't there before. Not because the world is quieter, but because you are. It's like being underwater, and rising just enough to see the surface ripple, but choosing not to break it yet. This moment, this between, is not productivity, it is presence. And dopamine, sensing your movement, begins to stir. It starts small. A tug of curiosity. A flicker of need. An internal note that something might be waiting. Not danger. Just unopened potential. And here, in the softness of your return, you will feel it differently than before. It's not a roar. It's not a command. It's a familiar voice you no longer mistake for truth. You hear it for what it is. Momentum disguised as meaning. And because you remember what it felt like to live without it. For a few hours, at least. You don't answer right away. You pause. You sit with the reassembly. You let yourself come back in pieces. Not because it's broken. But because it no longer needs to arrive fully formed. Most of us wake up already reaching, already planning, already calculating the day's return on effort. But what if the first moments of morning weren't about becoming useful? What if they were about remaining whole? Before dopamine builds the stage. Before identity reclaims its posture. Before thought becomes another treadmill. There is a window. A few sacred minutes. Where the distance between being and doing is still wide enough to breathe through. And that breath, full, slow, unscripted, is a rebellion against every loop that once told you urgency was virtue. Because urgency will return. That's inevitable. The system was designed to bring it back. To scan. To search. To chase the phantom scent of improvement. But you don't have to greet it with obedience. You can acknowledge it without feeding it. Notice it without writing it. Feel it without fearing it. This is the gift of deep rest. Not just recovery. But reorientation. The ability to step back into the loop with the knowledge that it is a loop. That it is not you. And that your attention is not a currency to be spent at first light. Dopamine wants you to move. It rewards forward. It has no tolerance for stillness without reason. But after a night like this, you remember, not all motion is meaningful. Sometimes, stillness is the meaning. And the self that rises from real sleep, knows how to remain intact while the world accelerates around it. You are not the acceleration. You are the witness. The calm center that remembers how to observe the storm without becoming it. So you take your time. You don't sprint toward screens. You don't collapse back into pattern. You let the light find your skin slowly. You let your breath find its depth. You let your feet find the ground like a ceremony. You give the day permission to begin. But not before you decide to begin with it. And that decision, conscious, unhurried, chosen, is the clearest sign that the loop no longer owns you. Not entirely. Not today. Because today, you carry something new. Not an idea. Not a task. A feeling. The residue of unburdened sleep. The muscle memory of vanishing. The deep knowledge that you can return to that place. Without running there. You don't have to exhaust yourself to earn it. You don't have to fix your life to deserve it. You don't have to solve every open loop before you're allowed to disappear again. The door is always open. The weightless place still remembers your name. And the silence that held you will hold you again. But you don't stay in that silence all day. You weren't meant to. You re-enter the world. You write the emails. You answer the questions. You sit inside the noise. But something's different now. You know what it sounds like beneath the noise. You know the shape of your attention when it's not being chased. You know what the self feels like without scaffolding. And that knowing is your anchor. You can return to it. At noon. At dusk. In the middle of a sentence. You can pause and remember. None of this is required to be whole. That is the long arc of sleep. Beyond recovery. Beyond energy. It returns you to yourself. So you can move through the world without disappearing in it. It gives you back your edges. So you know when to soften them again. It teaches you how to hold the hunger without being consumed by it. And tomorrow, when the loop begins again, you'll carry that lesson in your breath. In the way you listen without racing to respond. In the way you stop before you collapse. In the way you say no. Without apology. You've been reassembled. But not rebuilt. Not armored. You came back as something softer. Still shaped, but not rigid. Still aware, but not addicted. And this softness is strength. The kind that doesn't shout. The kind that doesn't need to win. The kind that knows exactly when to step back into the dark. And let go. Dopamine will try. It always does. It will dangle the future. It will weaponize memory. It will package not enough in every hour. But now you see it. Now you feel the seam. Between action and being. Between story and stillness. Between hunger and peace. And that seam, thin, quiet, patient, is your way back. Always, even in the middle of the day. Even in the middle of your life. You know how to return now. And you will. Again. And again. Not because you're lost. But because you remember where home is. It begins again. You wake. You breathe. You move. And like clockwork, the world reaches for your attention. Not with noise, but with need. The blinking icons. The messages. The unfinished conversations from yesterday. The schedules, the checklists, the tiny digital breadcrumbs you laid out for yourself in another state of mind. And before you even sit upright, your dopamine system has already begun assembling its machinery. It wants momentum. It wants to resume the pattern. It wants to chase something, anything, that might signal progress. But you've been here before. You've seen what's beneath it. And still, you feel the pull. Because the hunger doesn't stop. Not after rest. Not after revelation. Not even after you've seen through the game. This is the part no one wants to admit. Even with awareness, the ache persists. Because dopamine is not a flaw. It's not a trick or a glitch in your wiring. It's the oldest strategy your body knows. Keep moving. Keep seeking. Stay just a little unsatisfied. And it works. Until you realize that it doesn't. Not always. Not forever. There comes a point where the system keeps asking. But nothing it reaches for will ever fill it. And that's when the ache changes. Not louder. Deeper. It becomes a low-frequency hum beneath your day. The sense that something's missing. Even when everything looks right. You eat. You reply. You meet deadlines. You accomplish things. But something inside you is still reaching, still checking, still waiting for that one perfect input. That will finally quiet the hunger. And it never comes. Not because it doesn't exist. But because that's not how dopamine works. It doesn't reward having. It rewards the idea of getting. Which means that the closer you come to something, the more your system spikes with possibility. The less satisfaction you actually feel when you arrive. That's not failure. That's the mechanism. It was designed to keep early humans alive. But now it's keeping you from ever feeling done. This is the hunger that can't be fed. It's not greedy. It's not destructive. It's just unsatisfiable. Because what it's seeking isn't food, isn't power, isn't even achievement. It's seeking continuation. Dopamine isn't a destination system. It's a navigation system. It cares that you're in motion. That you're somewhere between here and there. But the second you arrive, it starts scanning again. What's next? What's after this? What haven't you thought of yet? That's why your most accomplished days sometimes feel the most hollow. Because the system doesn't mark your victories. It just resets the target. And here's the part that hurts. In a quiet, unnameable way, you've shaped your life around this hunger. The jobs you took. The habits you built. The people you thought would complete you. All wrapped around the promise that one more step would make you full. But you never were. And deep down, you know that. You know the cycle. The rise of excitement. The brief climax. The slow return to restlessness. And still, the next time it whispers. The next goal, the next insight, the next new thing. You feel the pull. Because the system is ancient. And your awareness, no matter how deep, is still learning how to sit beside it without following. So what now? You can't kill the hunger. You can't outrun it. You can't reason with it. But you can stop feeding it the wrong thing. Most people feed the hunger with stimulation, with novelty, with input, with more. And that only teaches the system that movement equals relief. But movement is not the cure. Presence is. Because presence doesn't promise satisfaction. It doesn't chase or resolve. It just is. And dopamine can't hold on to that. It slips through its fingers. It offers no future. It ends the chase. You will feel the system fight this. It will throw questions at you. What should I be doing? What am I forgetting? What's the next step? It will make stillness feel like irresponsibility. But you can meet those questions with nothing. Not silence. Not resistance. Just absence of fuel. Let the thought float by. Let the desire hum. Don't feed it a story. Don't give it a narrative. And watch how the ache begins to fade. Not because it's been answered. But because you're no longer agreeing to be moved by it. This doesn't mean you stop doing. It doesn't mean you renounce progress or passion. It means you stop using dopamine as proof of meaning. You stop chasing the sensation of almost there. As if it were a compass to joy. And instead, you learn to pause in the middle of the ache. To say, I feel the pull. I feel the hunger. But I do not need to answer it. That's where peace begins, not at the end of desire, but at the moment you recognize it doesn't control you. This takes practice. You will fail. You will forget. You will find yourself back in the loop, refreshing the page, replaying the conversation, reaching for the next little hit of almost satisfaction. And that's okay. Because the point is not perfection. The point is awareness without compliance. To hear the hunger without jumping to feed it. To feel the ache and stay. Not frozen. Not paralyzed. Just aware. And in that awareness, the hunger slowly changes shape. From craving to signal. From demand to reminder. That you are still alive. Still moving. Still able to choose. You don't conquer dopamine. You walk beside it. Like an old friend who talks too much. Who always wants one more adventure. One more plan. One more explanation for why today isn't quite enough. But you don't believe it anymore. You nod. You smile. You let it chatter. And then you turn to the quiet. You choose stillness. You choose breath. You choose the radical act of not reaching for more. When this moment, this body, this breath, is already enough, there will always be another thought, another step, another hunger. But not all hunger must be answered. And not every ache must be a call to arms. Some are just echoes. Some are just noise. Some are just dopamine, doing what it was built to do. And you are not just the loop. You are the space it echoes inside. That space doesn't chase. That space doesn't ache. That space doesn't need. It just holds, and that holding is how you come home. There comes a moment, after the dopamine loop has lost its shine, after the chase quiets but doesn't disappear, when you're left with something that most people spend their entire lives avoiding, stillness. Not the pleasant kind. Not the kind that comes wrapped in candlelight and ocean sounds. The real kind. Stillness that waits for you without agenda. Stillness that doesn't flatter you. Stillness that doesn't care who you were when you fell asleep last night. This isn't meditation, it's confrontation. And it doesn't ask questions. It is the question. Who are you when there's nothing left to want? Nothing to fix. Nothing to rehearse. Who are you? When dopamine is no longer holding your attention hostage. Most people never find out. Because we confuse stillness with emptiness. And we were taught to fear the empty. An unfilled schedule. An unresolved feeling. A blank screen. But underneath all of it, beneath the hunger, beneath the motion, is something that isn't empty at all. It's full of unsorted memory. Full of sensory dust. Full of truths we've postponed because the loop made them inconvenient. Stillness doesn't hide these things. It reveals them. And in doing so, it reveals you. At first, it's uncomfortable. Not because you're doing something wrong. But because you're doing something different. The system is used to friction. Used to scanning, swiping, solving. Even in rest, it wants a job. So when you offer it nothing. No input. No story. No feedback loop to latch onto. It flinches. You'll feel it. That twitch of the hand toward your phone. That automatic compulsion to fill the gap with sound. That sudden, unprovoked anxiety. That maybe you've forgotten something. But that's not a sign of failure. It's the nervous system recalibrating. It's the withdrawal symptoms of a life lived in constant stimulation. Stillness has no dopamine hooks. It doesn't give you the illusion of progress. It doesn't reward the cleverness of your thoughts. It doesn't flood you with novelty. Which is why it's so rare, so avoided, so mistaken for boredom. But boredom is just rest. That hasn't been allowed to deepen. Give it time. 5 minutes. 10. An hour. Eventually, the loop burns itself out. And what's left is something you might not have felt since childhood. Being without needing. Not happy. Not productive. Not enlightened. Just whole, in a quiet way. Like a lake with no wind. Like breath that stretches without effort. But here's what they don't tell you. Stillness doesn't flatter the ego. It doesn't make you feel special. It doesn't reinforce your narrative. It doesn't care about your personal mythology. It simply is. And that can feel disorienting. Even threatening. Because if you're not chasing, not fixing, not improving, then what? What are you for? Where does your meaning live? If not inside momentum? This is the existential wound that dopamine keeps covered. The ache that it keeps just out of reach. By always offering something next. But stillness doesn't offer next. It offers now. And if you can stay long enough, the panic fades. Because you begin to realize something radical. There's nothing missing. You were never behind. You were just addicted to the sensation of catching up. This is where sleep, stillness, and surrender begin to share the same shape. None of them come when called. None of them bloom under pressure. They only arrive when you stop asking them to perform. And the same is true for peace. It isn't a mood. It's not a reward. It's not the end result of completing every task or winning every inner argument. It's what emerges when the noise dies down. And you stop confusing stimulation for aliveness. It doesn't dance. It doesn't shout. It doesn't update in real time. It just sits, and waits, and watches you slowly remember what it feels like to not need anything. In this stillness, something strange happens. You remember how much time you've wasted trying to be worthy. Of love, of sleep, of stopping. You remember how often your self-worth was tied to velocity, how fast you responded, how much you achieved, how clearly you could predict the next 10 steps, and for a moment, you grieve. Because you see the loop from the outside now. You see how it made you sprint through years, without ever asking where you were going. But grief is good, grief is part of healing, grief is what happens, when you stop numbing long enough to tell the truth. And the truth is, you were always allowed to rest. You just didn't believe it. The world won't understand this part of you. Not easily. The world will keep applauding motion. It will reward the dopamine-driven versions of you. The one who says yes. The one who climbs faster. The one who never lets the silence linger too long. But you're different now. You know what lives on the other side of stillness. And once you've seen it, you can never quite go back. Not all the way. Not without cost. Because now, when the noise returns, you hear the silence behind it. You know it's there. Always, waiting like a sky, beneath your thoughts. You'll still fall into the loop. Of course you will. It's built into your biology. But now, you'll notice it faster. You'll feel the hunger and recognize it for what it is. Just movement, dressed up as meaning. You won't have to obey. You won't have to react. You'll just observe. And that observation, pure, quiet, unmotivated, is the final authority. Not because it fixes anything, but because it no longer needs to. It just lets go. And that's what you're learning to do. Moment by moment. Again and again. Not win the inner war. Not master the system. Just stop gripping it so tightly. Let the loop loop. Let the ache ache. Let dopamine whisper all the what-ifs and almosts and maybes. And just, stay with the stillness long enough. To remember that the loop is not your home. It's just one voice. And now, you've heard a quieter one. The one that doesn't push. Doesn't prod. Doesn't need you to become anything other than what you already are. Complete. Breathing. Enough. And, finally, still. There is always one more. One more thought before sleep. One more check before rest. One more tug from the loop, subtle as a hand brushing your sleeve in a crowded room. And this final reach, is the most difficult to ignore. Not because it's urgent. Not because it's dangerous. But because it feels so close. The last unfinished thing. The last stray sentence. The last chance to believe that if you answer now, peace will arrive faster. It won't. But dopamine doesn't know that. It never did. This is the last descent. Not the gentle drift into half-dreams. Not the rehearsal that keeps you hovering at the surface. Not even the stillness you've come to recognize as sacred. This is deeper, darker. A kind of surrender that has no floor. And you don't step into it. You fall. Not because you gave up. But because you finally stopped holding on. The loop will try, even here. It will flash images, faces, fears, not as punishment, but as instinct. It wants to leave a trace of itself in the dark. Like a lighthouse flashing at a ship already out of sight. But in the last descent, the flashes fade. They stretch out, blur, and break apart. What once felt sharp enough to wound, now drifts apart like mist. You see the thought. You feel its shape. And then, You no longer care enough to hold it. The hand slips from the sleeve. The echo loses its echo. And you, finally, are gone. This is where language fails. We can describe rest. We can describe loops and echoes and hunger. We can even describe the drift into weightlessness. But this depth, it does not want words. It cannot be mapped. Because here, the narrator is silent. Not because it's been quieted. Because it has no place. Dopamine has no function here. The loop cannot survive where there is no next. This is the end of the machinery. The place it cannot follow. And for once, you are not a participant. You are not a witness. You are not a self. You are simply not here. And that absence is not terrifying. It is mercy. Because you don't need to be conscious every second to matter. You don't need to be reaching to be alive. You don't need to narrate your own survival in order to keep existing. Life carries you. The body breathes without permission. The heart remembers its rhythm without supervision. You dissolve into the fabric that made you. And the silence is not empty. It is full of repair, full of recalibration, full of the things the waking mind will never notice but always depend on. You think you vanished. But really, you were being held. Morning will come. It always does. And when it does, the hunger will return. The loop will hum. The echoes will begin their daily script. But something in you will be different. Not because you defeated dopamine. Not because you silenced the noise forever. But because you have proof now. Proof that you can let go. Proof that you can disappear without consequence. Proof that stillness survives you. And once you've touched that truth, you can never quite believe the loop the same way again. The loop will say, "You're behind." And you'll answer, "Behind what?" The silence doesn't keep score. It will say, "You need more." And you'll answer, "I've already been to the place where nothing was missing." It will say, "If you stop, you'll disappear." And you'll answer, "I did stop. I did disappear. And I came back whole." That is the gift of the last descent. Not just rest, not just energy, but perspective. The reminder that your worth is not tied to vigilance. That your story is not written only in wakefulness. That you are allowed to leave and return, and still be yourself. Sleep is not the opposite of life. It is part of its rhythm. The inhale and exhale of being. The night half of existence. And dopamine, loud, restless, relentless dopamine, is only half the story. The other half is this. The quiet that does not move. The silence that does not chase. The darkness that does not ask for anything but surrender. So tonight, when the loop pulls one last time, when the hunger begs for one more answer, when the echo offers you the illusion of just one more thought, let it go. You've seen what's waiting beneath it. You've felt the mercy of the absence. You've lived through the falling and discovered you were caught. The system will still try. It always will. That's its nature. But you don't have to answer anymore. Because you know now. The last descent is not death. It's the other half of living. And so you fall. Into darkness. Into stillness. Into the place dopamine cannot follow. You fall. Not with fear. But with trust. Because you've learned the truth. You don't disappear when you stop becoming. You only disappear when you never allow yourself to rest. Sleep isn't escape. It's proof. Proof that you are more than the loop. Proof that you are more than hunger. Proof that you are enough. Even in the silence. And as you drift into the last descent,